Welcome, everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge, and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. Our mission is simple but important: to advance both the research and the practical application of the concept of social capital. We've been running this webinar series since 2020, bringing people together from around the world to share ideas and build connections. If you'd like to be part of this community and the association, you're welcome to join. We're always looking for new members. And in fact, we're holding our first international conference on social capital in March next year in Dubai. We're honoured to be joined today by Geeta Mehta and Sushmita Shekar for a presentation about building social capital by design. Geeta is an adjunct professor of architecture and urban design at Columbia University in New York. She is also the founder of Social Capital Initiatives, which was formerly called Asia Initiatives, a non-profit organization that works with underserved communities to help improve neighborhoods, the environment, and people's livelihoods through social capital. Geeta is the innovator of Social Capital Credits, a virtual currency for social good that has won World-Changing Idea Award from the Fast Company and prizes from MIT Solve, General Motors, Vodafone, Caterpillar, and others. She was recognized in the Forbes list of 50 over 50 impact makers by Women's E-News as one of the 21st leaders of the 21st century and is a Purpose Prize Fellow. Sushmita is a urban designer and policy advocate and architect committed to advancing urban development that prioritizes social and environmental capital. She's been on the forefront of working with local and national governments in several countries, including the United States, China, Russia, India, and Middle East regions to promote sustainable urban economic growth. She was honored as one of the Future 100 designers in the United States and Canada region by Metropolis magazine. Welcome, Geeta and Sushmita, and over to you for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tristan, for this wonderful introduction. We are Sushmita and I are honored to be speaking on this wonderful forum today. And just to start off, I want to say that both of us as architects have been deeply concerned about how social capital can be created by the physical form of cities, of neighborhoods. And our work has really centered on developing ideas for architectural and urban design and landscape design that would actually help to create social capital. So with that, let's dive into it, and we can run this more as a conversation. As questions come to you, please put them in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. The first thing I want to say is that architecture and urban design are social acts. And it's important to say that because there have been moments in history when people forgot about that and architecture became more like form making. So the built environment can facilitate or hinder social capital. Next. Next. Okay, so there are three types of wealth, and unfortunately, the financial capital is what is getting most attention in the world today. We are starting to measure everything with financial capital, and that is a problem. So that leads to actually sidelining of ecological capital and social capital as major issues to be dealt with in every aspect of life and especially design. Next.
I'm having a bit of a lag here.
Yeah, thank you. Social capital is the glue, and according to the World Bank, it holds societies together, and without which there can be no economic growth or human well-being. So this has been sort of vaguely understood, but not really in a strong way that it needs to be brought to the forefront. And I think everyone on the call is probably familiar that the elements of social capital include trust in each other and in public institutions. I underline public institutions because the trust in governments and public institutions is really suffering in so many countries, and especially United States right now. And social networks and norms and community involvement and cohesion. Next. So what does built environment influence? How does built environment influence social capital? Really in every way. And we tried to just put some of these things together. It really impacts the workplace, the social capital at the workplace, at the home, in social networks, in informal networks, in really almost all aspects of our life, which is impacted by the built environment. Then the built environment also influences if we are building or losing social capital. Next. This is Gustavo Petro, President of Colombia, and he spoke so eloquently at UN General Assembly 2 years ago, and his talk was really actually underlining social capital and saying that the Frankenstein of humanity is in letting the markets and greed act without planning. That's the cause of climate disasters. There is no total peace without social, economic, and environmental justice. So we really need all three to come together. Next. So the building blocks of social capital we want to discuss today are inclusive urbanism, desegregated housing, social infrastructure that includes education, healthcare, and more, and public spaces, public transportation, trust in government, and trust among people. So we are going to discuss each one of these in a little more detail. Next. I want to underline that a lot of what is happening in the world is speculative urbanism, which is focused on profits only. It disregards social capital and often also disregards environmental capital. And so a lot of, like, I just came back from India and driving around India and flying over cities. You see the city, and all around that, you see a ring of these tall buildings, which are actually gated communities coming up. And what's driving these gated communities is simply profits, financial gains. And there's very little concern or time to think about the social and ecological impacts of these. Same thing is happening in China, which is the fastest uh, urban development ever in history, the largest expansion of urban areas ever. The picture on the left is a gated community in India that excludes the poorer people who actually make that sort of lifestyle possible, but they don't have any amenities inside and very little right to be inside and to enjoy the fruits of their labor. The picture on the right is in Infonavit housing in Mexico. And this phenomena has happened actually in many Central and South American countries where the government is keen to build affordable housing, but they don't do it themselves. They just give developers very cheap loan, and the developer then has a commitment to build X number of homes. And they often go out of the city in the countryside where the land is cheap, and they build the housing that they committed to. But this housing has hardly any concern for social capital. It's not connected to the city with public transport. There are no public spaces, uh, no sidewalks, no really possibilities for people to meet and actualize their social capital. Next. Yeah, I'm going to actually let Sushmita talk a little bit about housing that keeps people poor and housing that does not build social capital. Sushmita, please.
Thanks, Geeta. So housing really is critical because it, makes or even breaks communities. Housing is just not shelter. It really shapes relationships and, hold communities together. So here you can see two images. On the left is a subsidized housing community in California, which is really built on the outskirts of the city. It really isolates, the residents from jobs, transit, and all essential services. And even though this housing is subsidized, the daily cost of like just accessing the city becomes a big barrier to a lot of the communities who are going to live here. And similarly, in Bogota,
this one, sorry, is in Cali in Colombia, but yes, in California, similar things are happening in affordable housing. But please keep going.
Right, and similarly in Bogota, the image here you see is actually how informal settlements on the edge of the city really force these families to commute long distances and even have like very poor living conditions. So these examples really remind us of how housing is just not about like, providing units, but it's really creating spaces where people interact, they have a good environment to really build the connections and trust between the communities. Here we see a very different challenge in New York. NYCHA housing, which is like the public housing in the city, despite being located in different boroughs of the city, often struggles really to enhance social capital because many of these developments are like physically isolated. They are like concentrations of like poverty, which limits some of these residents to build that diversity of network. And even if you look at these images, the form of these super block buildings really isolate people from the street, which is a space where people naturally interact. And this really weakens some of the community ties. And there's also been real, disinvestment in these communities, like they don't have access to good community centers or even safe public spaces. And these really have an impact on like how they interact or like really, safety or like even places where they can build that a sense of social capital and social mobility. On the other hand, Singapore has a very interesting model of more mixed use, mixed income housing. And this intentionally brings in, younger families, migrants, and really families from diversity of backgrounds together. And by really mixing, different communities, different incomes, and integrating them in a very walkable mixed use neighborhoods, it really creates a space where social capital can naturally grow. And the government of Singapore has been insistent on this public housing, not just being a shelter for people, but really it's like a broader national project on creating that sense of community and shared identity within the city. And while we think about like these dense mixed use, mixed income housings, which sometimes help foster that interaction, I think New York is at the contrast of another spectrum where these super tall luxury towers are like really symbols of extreme wealth concentration, right? And it creates this social segregation among people. These towers almost serve like vertical gated communities. They have their private amenities. These towers don't really interact with the street and public realm. So this really highlights how inequality is not just economic, but it is spatially embedded in our cities. And as Geeta mentioned, like the form, the density of our cities really determine like the social mobility of people or the interaction of people. And New York is an example where there's this concentration of wealth inequity and segregation in the city. And this broader inequality is visible across the US. This is an image of like thousands of people waiting in cars at the San Antonio Food Bank during the pandemic. And this is like a striking reminder of how much insecurity of wealth continues to concentrate in many neighborhoods across the country. And this really weakens our social capital, because when shared civic life becomes like harder to sustain, people's realities are so different. So this really, creates that differences and inequality, which is growing in our cities and communities. And a part of all this really goes back to some of the planning ideas of the 20th century and how our cities are fundamentally structured. Modernist architects and planners really focused on form making, technology, like the highways, cars, but they really ignored like the social fabric of our cities. So some of our planning in the 20th century really focused on separating different uses, widening our streets, placing these huge towers and empty plazas. And these really weakened like the human scale interaction. And really, the car-centric growth didn't really foster that natural interaction that happened on our streets, right? It really transformed how people interact in our communities. And Le Corbusier his legacy is really embodied in this thinking. He famously once said, like, streets disgust us. And this kind of really captures the whole modernist mindset, because trying to eliminate streets, which is really the lifeline of our cities, undermines like the social capital naturally. And a lot of his ideas have been like, globally accepted and widely spread. And this really erased a lot of our like existing organic fabrics where, people interacted and social capital was inherently present. So some of these planning ideas eventually changed some of the ways that we interact with people. And later, towards the 1960s, we saw a lot of effort by urbanists, especially like Jane Jacobs here, who revived, the understanding that cities really thrive on like the streets and the public space. She really fought for like walkable blocks, mixed use blocks, and really spaces in our cities that enforce like interaction and really foster trust within the communities. She really shifted a lot of the conversation from like our car-centric modernist cities to really looking back at what human-centered cities looked like, and reminding all of us that, it's not just buildings that create cities, but it's really the public life and the public realm that really fosters that interaction and creates our cities. But even as like Jane Jacobs was, defending our cities, the American dream was moving to the suburbs, right? Car dependent, low density environments. People were promised that sense of privacy, but it often weakened social capital because in the suburbs, there is a very small chance of like spontaneous interaction between communities, or like even creating spaces that are walkable, so that people really can interact and build that social capital. And this suburban model often created social fragmentation between different communities. And the image that you see here, maybe I'll allow Geeta to say a few words, but really is an exhibition by Columbia that really talks about how housing is an infrastructure, and how it should kind of engage with, other systems like ecology, policy, social interaction, and like really challenges the traditional suburban family, single family house that's widespread in New York. Sorry, in the US. Geeta, you want to add a few words to this?
Yeah, I want to just add actually that suburbs are probably the most dangerous export of United States to the rest of the world. And I've driven in suburbs in India, and some of the signs say, "Come and live like in New Jersey," which is like a horrible idea. But yes, New York in in the last 2 decades actually added 6% to the population and 60% more urbanized land. That means swamps and farmlands were compromised, and suburbs sprouted there. So this is really unsustainable, not only from the ecological point of view, but as Sushmita mentioned, it really destroys the possibility of social capital. It's a very lonely life. And if you look today at the epidemic in America of these, dangerous substances, these addictive painkillers, for example, it very much has to do with breakdown of social capital. And in America, they say you drive till you qualify. That means you have to keep going out of the city till you can afford the mortgage on a house, which means the poorest people are now living furthest from the city. And those are the people who cannot actually afford the commute in terms of money or in terms of time. So it's really a very sad fact, and it is hurting United States tremendously, whether it's in terms of opioids or youth that are disengaged and disillusioned about the future. So this kind of physical development has very serious repercussions in people's life and in the life of communities. Back to you, Sushmita. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. So like in the previous slides, we talked about like how housing really, builds social capital. But today we're also seeing another layer of like gig economy, Airbnb, Uber, and other platforms that are really changing the way we live and interact. Like traditional forms of community, we live in long-term neighborhoods, stable jobs, shared public spaces. But all of this is kind of transforming a little bit with our gig economy. So there is like new forms of social capital that are building with like more, shared resources, shared models, shared cooperatives. So this also really helps, strengthen our social capital. And this is where like the community land trust is a very powerful model, because by owning land collectively, the community land trust ensures that housing really remains affordable to people, and that the voice of these residents are really heard. It also strengthens some of the like local governance and keeps communities bonded together. So it really shows how like collective ownership can really build social capital, and people can have more equitable access to land and housing. I'll transfer to you, Geeta, for the next few slides.
Thank you. So looking into the future, what will artificial intelligence do to social capital? It's really a fun thing to think about and scary at the same time. So up to 1 billion people may become climate refugees. Some people say it could be even more. So what is that going to do to social capital when whole communities are uprooted from where they are and dispersed? Because most cities are not even willing to accept a huge number of refugees, whether capitalism refugees or war refugees, like we saw what happened in Europe. The response was maybe very warm in the beginning, but pretty soon turned into a huge political battle. And artificial intelligence and robots taking people's jobs, what is that going to do to future of work? And if the future of work is radically different from what it is now, what does that do to social capital? So these are some of the big thoughts that we don't really have answers, but Sushmita and I just wanted to throw this out for hopefully for our discussion later on. Next. Yeah, one example, just to look at all these brown areas in New York City, all those are actually in danger of storm surge. New York had a big lesson when the storm Sandy hit. But, this is the story of all coastal cities, whether it's Mumbai, whether it is Shanghai, whether it is London or New York. These sea level rise and storm surges are going to displace people. In countries like India and Bangladesh, we are already seeing huge impacts and people having to move. And so once you move communities not together, but really separate people, then there is loss of social capital. How are we going to deal with that? That's another big question we want to articulate here, although we don't have the answer to that. Next. And the key thing is that technical solutions are not going to be enough. When sea level rises and storm surges happen, we will need more social capital. So I think it's like a time issue that we need to build the social capital of communities now in anticipation of the big displacements that are surely coming. Next. This is Manhattan, some of the ideas. The picture on the right is what actually happened in Sandy. On the left is some of these ideas. And the picture slide before also, we have a solution, or what's being built is called the Big U. Sushmita, can you go back to the earlier slide? So the Big U is actually partly on the right-hand side in yellow. It's partly a wall. It's partly public spaces like on mounds on higher elevation to stop the water from coming in, because the most vulnerable area in New York is actually the Wall Street and the financial center area, which actually was built on top of landfill and therefore is most susceptible to this kind of damage. Next slide. So where is the social capital that is going to help? Yes, you can rely on support from the fire department and police department, but the first responders are actually the neighbors, somebody who's in the community. So I think the communities have to be trained to deal with this. Next. This is in Colombia, actually a lot of good examples of social urbanism are coming from places like South America. Tristan was in Chile just recently. You will hear about that in our next newsletter and so on. But for example, Colombia also has some very, very interesting ideas in social urbanism, whether it is the commitment to provide the best services to the poorest areas in terms of transportation, suddenly making people who live on the hillsides, making it possible for them to come down to work or for education. On the picture on the right is what they call a library, but it's more than a library. It's a social center. It's a job training, skill training, child care center, and it just provides the amenities that people in those informal settlements need. And the current, or the mayor, just the past mayor, a woman, she thought of the whole city as care blocks. So every care block should have one care center where people, particularly women who take care of others in the family or community, can be taken care of themselves in terms of counseling support, in terms of job opportunities, in terms of medical help, so they can bring the person they are taking care of for a few hours, and then the center takes care of them. So these are really ideas that build social capital, social urbanism, that we can learn from. Next. Actually, in Medellin, Colombia used to be the murder capital of the world, with most murders anywhere. And then, as they built this care infrastructure and services for the informal settlements, the murder rate came down. So there was a direct correlation. Next. Yeah, I think there's a little lag there. I want to now talk about, so we've tried to frame the big picture of what is happening and how physical design, architecture design, urban design, landscape design, how they are related to the issues. And now we want to go deeper into what are we doing about it. And the first thing I will talk about is Herbs, which is one of another nonprofit that I co-founded with Rahul Srivastava and Matya Sechanove, two colleagues. And our office is in Mumbai, in India, although our work is also in Paris, in Geneva, in South America, and elsewhere. But our starting hub, is in Mumbai and still very active. So it's Herbs user-generated cities. So the idea was to turn the idea of creating cities completely 306 or 180 degrees, to say that people who are closest to the issues are closest to solutions. So every urban project should really be co-designed with the people, and hence Herbs user-generated cities. Next slide. So we've run workshops in Tokyo, in Istanbul, in Mumbai, of course, and in Paris, and always at the invitation of local communities who we organize workshops with, to co-envision the future. And this often turns out to be very different than what the politicians or the experts sitting in another country or another place thought about. It's really the voice of people. We have architects join, and community members and politicians, and some quick models are created, buildings moved around, streets re-envisioned. And then at the end of this exercise, these results are proposed to the city, to the authorities, and community has a more clear idea of what is it that they would like to see in their own environment and in their own communities. It's very energizing and empowering, and a huge learning lesson for us. Next. So, as I mentioned, Herbs is located in Dharavi, and Dharavi is actually a community-owned craft village, but it is called a slum because the minute you call area slum in India, then the government has a right to redevelop it. But it used to be outside of Mumbai, and then Mumbai grew around it. So now it's in the heart of Mumbai. It's in the middle of Mumbai. So therefore, it's very prime real estate. So for the last 20 years, Herbs is actually 15 or 18 years old now. But for the last few decades, many developers have really been wanting to redevelop this for high-end housing, for more lucrative real estate ideas. But the residents of Dharavi have resisted it because their social capital is super strong. They come together to resist these new ideas, and the government saying that some of the land of Dharavi is actually government land and they are squatters and they should move out. But also Dharavi adds more than $1 billion to Mumbai's GDP every year. So they actually really some parts of the Ravi are like were a fishing village which is older than Mumbai. So they say, no, this is our land. Mumbai, Mumbai is the uh, occupier or squatter that came after us. So this is an ongoing tussle, and right now there's a huge developer who's looking to redevelop it. The government has given the contract, so it'll be very interesting to see how the community and developer interface works out. Next. Yeah, this image really highlights what the Rabi is. If you look from a drone or an airplane, it may look brown and not so good. But just look at what's happening on the street. This is actually a 80 feet, 90 feet street, but half of it gets closed every Friday for the Muslims who live there to pray. So on the right-hand side, you see all those white shirts. Those are people praying. And then right after the prayer, the street will be opened again. Then it might be closed another day for a Hindu festival or a Christian festival. So the Ravi is actually a place where all different religions and communities, they live together in great peace. And what better example can you have of social capital? So this is like a physical environment of small streets and people who play in the same area, meet each other on daily basis, and have tremendous social capital. Next. Yeah, this was an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art where the street life of the Ravi, you saw the Ravi looking at it from above, not so vibrant, but if you look at the street level, you see so much vitality and people really, going about their work, creating leather jackets that are sold in New York or creating pottery that is exported and lots of micro industries and micro supply chains that actually support lots of businesses around Mumbai, and people watch each other's child. So it's really, really a community. If you saw the movie Slumdog Millionaire, that was really a bad representation of Dharavi, because really no child would be left uncared for in this nice community. Next. So these are the micro public spaces. So the women come out of their homes and they do their craft or food processing or so on and talk to each other. So this kind of a small micro public space and then bigger public spaces and playgrounds. So that's the system that really builds social capital and is exemplary in how we should design. And this is called an informal settlement and therefore fit for redevelopment. Next. Yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Sushmita now, who will talk about our other big nonprofit social capital initiatives. And as Tristan mentioned, we used to be called Asia Initiative, but then we are now not just in Asia, we are in Africa, we are in the United States. So we have renamed ourselves Social Capital Initiatives. Over to you, Sushmita.
Thanks, Geeta. Today I want to share a little bit of our work at Social Capital Initiatives, which is very close to my heart. Geeta founded Social Capital Initiatives almost 25 years ago. And I've been a part of this lovely team from like the last 6.5 years. And our mission is to really leverage social capital and to support underserved communities in areas like health, education, and improving livelihoods of these communities. And largely through our work, we found that while some of these communities might be economically poor, they really possess other forms of wealth. That's the knowledge, the commitment to make their neighborhoods better, and stronger inherent social capital. And these are some of the untapped assets that we want to mobilize to really create impact in these communities. So to harness this potential, we developed SOCs, which is like a community currency for social good. So when people, do better for their communities, like, for example, cleaning their communities or planting trees, they can earn these credits. It's similar to like the carbon credits, and then people can redeem these credits for other things like education, healthcare, and really improving the quality of life of these communities. And the picture on the right is our SOCs app. So now all these credits are recorded in this app, and people can redeem these credits for different healthcare, education, or other needs. I think the key feature of SOCs is really the community. They really define, everything in the process of it. So big thing is actually defining what the earning and redeeming menu looks like. So here is an example of what this menu could be. So people can earn SOCs for actions like recycling or sending, girl kids to school, planting trees, greening public spaces, or even like mentoring peers. And all of this is, as they do, is recorded in our app, and this SOCs can be redeemed for essential services like healthcare, low interest loans, and something that's popular is even like, phone talk time, where people have access to these phones, but, are not able to pay for the talk times. And by really linking, these tangible rewards, SOCs really motivates long-term sustained community participation. And also, as like communities engage in this process, they become custodians of the project. They, really want to take care of their neighborhoods, and they're really engaged through the process. It's not like an external, agency coming and doing this for the communities, but the community feels that sense of ownership and like reward for like the social commitment. Our SOCs model operates globally, as Geeta mentioned. We have projects in India, Kenya, Ghana, Costa Rica, and even the United States. And like the program is really versatile in a way that the framework can be adapted to like different communities and different local contexts, and they can produce different impacts. And over the last year, we've also received a lot of awards from like Fast Company. We received the World Changing Idea Award in 2020. And we are growing globally across different geographies. So the next few slides, I kind of want to highlight some of our projects across different geographies and how, we've adapted to address the diverse needs of different communities across the world. So the image here is our project from Washington, D.C. And what you see here is like the Socratic dialogues, where residents of the community really help, identify the challenges in their community and co-create the earning and the redeeming menu. And this approach has really built ownership in the communities, like even strengthening their social capital. So by allowing the participants to decide, how they want to make their neighborhood better, what are the, essential things that are required for their neighborhood, and understanding like how can, they be rewarded for this, makes them feel more empowered and engaged in the process. So this is our image from India. So we partnered with a Save Life Foundation on this project on Mumbai-Pune Expressway. So local communities there face a lot of safety challenges because of very high death rate on the highways. In fact, this highway has one of the highest death rate in India. So what the project does is really reward drivers who drive very carefully with socks. And here you can see that image of like the Socrative dialogue, where they identify some of the challenges of safety on these highways and how they can make it better for the communities. So really involving people in the decision making, involving people whose lives are directly affected, helps build that bond, trust, and community and community support. This is our next project in Taiwan. We piloted the payment for ecosystem services using socks. And this program really demonstrates how even environmental sustainability can be paired with social development and social capital. So the government of Taiwan has a plan to provide funding to tribal farmers to support their income. And what we are proposing is that these payments are actually done related for their work in biodiversity conservation, reforestation, and even like water smart agriculture. And as people do this, they can be rewarded through the social capital credits or SOCs. And this model can be very useful around the world. Because every time people actually do work that is a benefit for the ecology, they can see tangible rewards for it through the SOCs, and this really strengthens communities and brings them together. So at Social Capital Initiatives, we're also exploring the SOCs model for the NYCHA housing communities. So in partnership with American Institute of Architects, we worked with the residents of Jefferson Housing to really understand what are some of the issues that they face in these NYCHA communities, and to see how some of their public spaces can be more user-friendly and safe for the community. So we really engage with this a community engagement exercise where residents could kind of identify what are the spaces that need improvement, what are the kinds of improvement they need, and how do we really build a safer environment for everyone in a space where people can actually interact. And the next set of images really help visualize what this space would look like. Like the image here, relooks at the public realm, and instead of like it just being paved streets, really adding, benches, the shaded spaces, these really can foster that interaction between the communities. And again, this is another visualization showing how the transformation of like the public spaces can really improve social capital in communities, like creating play spaces, or even like, walkable streets and walkable public realm. And this can really foster that social capital that, we see, we can build in our communities. Again, this is an image for the NYCHA project in Polo Grounds, where we visualized like the children's play area, and really looking at how these kind of spaces can bring the community together and create a safe place for them. And this is a similar project in India, where we looked at, again, like how some of these streets that are, like feel isolated, don't really have that place for interaction, can be created into more safer environments. and can be designed as a space where people can interact. And this is a project in India. So the Vaigai River is one of like the sacred rivers in India, but over the years it has been like polluted. And you can see it's almost like a little drain, like the river has completely transformed. So we partnered with the local communities to really think about how can we revive this river, which has such an important significance for the communities. And here the local communities were invited to be like custodians of the river and custodians of the project. So as they kind of brainstormed about ways of like cleaning the river, planting along its banks, and really supporting reviving the river, they could earn credits, which could be later redeemed for other essential services. And what is critical is that the program was co-created with the communities from start to finish, like from understanding what the challenges are, ways to address these challenges, as well as like building the Socratic, like the SOX menu. So they were part of the whole process. So really, they have the whole custodianship of the project, and they feel like, they're empowered to take care of these rivers and restore them. So that's a little snippet of our projects in different geographies, but like each of these projects can be adapted, in different communities across the world. And our work really aligns with the social development goals. If you see the 14 SDGs, around 8 are tied to social capital, 5 to ecological capital, and 4 to financial capital. So by really rewarding these communities through SOX and for rewarding their actions for social good, we can really build resilient communities and empower these communities with stronger social capital. Thank you, Geeta. If you want to add anything, or we could open up for questions.
No, I think we should open up to questions. I just want to add to Sushmita's comments that actually through our work of the 17 UN Sustainable Goals, we actually address 14 of them. And although 8 are specifically for social capital, but actually all 14 do in some way or the other relate to the 17 goals. So yeah, that's like, even if our work is very small and a drop in the bucket, but that's the direction we are very excited to be working in. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to explain some of this. And Tristan, can we open it to questions now?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, my name is Jeff Donaldson. I'm on the board of directors of ISCA. Tristan unfortunately had to step away for a moment, so I've got the privilege of grabbing the helm, as we say that. And I would say your drop in the bucket is something incredible. I myself am a professor of disaster and emergency management here in Canada, working hard on the social capital side, trying to use projects just like yours to encourage building resilience at the community table, around those tables. So it's just music to my heart. I think it's absolutely brilliant and wonderful. And I was totally unaware that this was ongoing. So I learned something amazing today. If anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll go to you in succession to ask the questions. Or if you would prefer to type them in the chat, I can ask them on your behalf. Just indicate in the chat whether you want to ask that yourself or you want us to do it on your behalf. We do have one question in the chat there, and I don't want to mispronounce your name, but would you like me to ask that for you? Would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, Jeff. Yeah, go ahead and ask it for me.
Okay, perfect. My pleasure. So the question is, in what ways does strong social capital reduce downstream costs for governments, funders, and organizations? And how can we better integrate this into fiscal planning? Governments, developers, and investors typically only pay attention when there are financial gains to be made.
It's such an important question. Thank you so much for asking that. Yes, when communities have that capacity to come together and take care of the environment, it lessens the load for the government. Actually, historically, before the governments, especially in wealthy countries, stepped in, communities did a lot of things for each other. People did a lot of things for each other. And then slowly, as the governments get wealthy and want to take over some of those functions, then communities stop doing that and actually become weak. So the question is, in what ways strong social capital reduces the downstream cost for a government? And that's actually a very important thing to consider, particularly, as Jeff said, in the face of climate disasters and other disasters that are definitely happening more frequently. So, in fact, the government can no longer do all of those things, right? No matter how wealthy. Like, look at the government in Canada, in United States, in Europe, and they are not able to really help in emergencies, unexpected events. So I think one, that they cannot do it, and two, if they could do it, the cost would be so exorbitant. So I think people taking over that is essential. Sushmita, do you want to add something to that?
I mean, and just to add to that, like a lot of the times, like the approval process of projects cause so much of delay because communities are not buying into projects, right? But actually engaging them as custodians of the project can actually help improve this process and like fasten approvals, and also like create less conflict between like communities and like city governments. And I think, as Geeta mentioned, I think especially when it comes to disasters, I think that's where, when communities have that strong social capital, they can respond way faster than the governments. And we've seen this in, the pandemic. So I think that's where like it helps offset a lot of costs for, larger public institutions. And even developers, when like communities have a buy-in, it's much faster to, move the project. And if they take ownership, they can really design the project well.
And I would just add that I think some of the keys to that is educating on how to build those relationships. And that this is very timely for me. Just Neil, I'll get to you in just 1 second. I'm teaching a course right now on facilitation in a multi-stakeholder environment, trying to teach the current and the future generation of emergency managers how to create these enabling environments where you bring these voices together around those very tables that you showed in the pictures. How do you encourage people from the private sector, from the NGO sector, from the community groups? How do we encourage them to get around that table to start that conversation? So this is an exceptionally timely. I'm thrilled that I'm here. Neil, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff. That was an incredibly useful interlude as well. Sushmita, Geeta, that was fabulous. So thank you so much. And I love the idea of the social capital credits being a part of negotiation and dialogue with communities about what giving looks like and what those shared goals are. My question, and mine to Geeta, when you said, some of our communities have become weak. And there's links to what Jeff was saying in terms of the facilitation programs he's got in. The truth in our context in the United Kingdom is that when we see attempts by government to reignite a sense of social capital, so our government has just announced a $10 billion Pride in Place program. So money that goes, significant amounts of money that go to local communities. But what we've seen in the past is that some of these communities, because they've become fragmented, because they would see what they believe to be outgroups within their community as being a threat, will receive these initiatives as if it's a sense of competition about access to power and access to resource. And again, we are arguing hard, as Jeff is doing, around that facilitation model and helping communities find ways of building understanding with each other. But we're also curious about what relational readiness looks like. So if there are a series of indicators that we can say, okay, the ground now has been prepared enough that it will bear the weight or be able to best utilize the energy of some of these relational interventions. So it's just if anyone has got anything to say, what are the criteria that we might be encouraging governments and communities to think about how they can prepare for some of these interventions in ways that make them more likely to go well and less likely to actually increase competition and conflict. So any hints and pointers?
Wow, it's so impressive that the government has put out these $10 billion to strengthen communities. I think I lived in Japan for 23 years, actually, and Japan is so earthquake prone that one of the things that communities were really encouraged or invited to do and encouraged to do was preparation for earthquakes. But that was the way they did that actually is an interesting model of us to prepare all communities that are going to face these climate emergencies and other shocks. So they would have these training sessions actually every 6 months in every community. It would be more like a street fair or a festival, but they would have these trucks or vans. You can go inside and feel what an earthquake is going to feel like, but then also talk about what the preparation is, what the first aid situation is, and where would you go in a disaster, and when would you leave your home and not leave your home. And then they invited people in the community to volunteer as people who would then become anchors at the time of emergency. For example, they would be then connected directly to the government, but community members would be connected with them. So sort of a network. And they spend a lot of effort on that because earthquakes are, such a frequent occurrence, and they've had some serious ones as well. So I thought that brought community out in sort of a fun and meaningful way. And then those people who volunteered to be the local champions, they would really maybe have micro events within their community. So something like that, I think, is very interesting to look at. But great that the government is understanding the power of social capital and wanting to encourage that. And competition is, I don't know, maybe healthy. I don't know. I would like to hear more about that.
That's fabulous. We have a question in the chat from David. Do you want me to ask the question on your behalf? I will take that as a yes. He asks, how are youth given special attention, particularly in aspects of sports and games, taking into consideration the cohort is an important group to benefit and increase their social capital, sustain the project benefits, and improve their positive development?
Sushmita, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think younger people today, like, we need the most of social capital, especially in the digital era where all of us are just glued to our phones. I think really creating that spaces for sports and engagement is pretty critical for younger people. And Geeta, I don't know if you want to add a few examples from like the projects itself.
Yeah, let's just go back to the Ravi, where cricket, as you know, in India, people are super passionate about. And as much as the Ravi is so tightly packed and so many people and the streets are so narrow, no one ever touches the cricket field. Cricket field is sacred. And so it does bring together people regularly. And also interesting, there's a gender issue to that cricket field is mostly for boys and men, and then there's a fish market, which is fish market in the morning, but the rest of the space it becomes a meeting place for women. So this sort of public spaces that have a a program that community members really relate to, I think is very interesting. And it's actually an important and fun way to build social capital. I recently went to a Wimbledon match and some other sports matches, and how communities come together for one team or another. That's, I think, something to learn from and exploit or deploy when we think about building social capital of communities, that people are actually hungry for that community, and the sports becomes a venue that they can latch on, or a system that they can latch on to. I think we have a lot to learn there, actually, learn from these sports communities, actually.
And I would have to say that I've never had the pleasure of being to India, but being a Canadian, and I understand our passion for hockey, I know exactly how those two go together, and how a simple hockey game without any expensive equipment can bring the community together and build those cross-cultural, cross-identity bonds of just the kids who don't carry the baggage sometimes that the parents carry. And it's a great equalizer and a great contributor to social capital. I have one more question in the chat here. And it says, how are you experiencing increased social capital impacting generational wealth building and intergenerational knowledge sharing?
Very important question. And yes and no. I think that the intergenerational wealth of communities, I think it's eroding, especially in wealthy countries where young people have an option, or even pressure from their peers to then leave the parents' home and then go live by themselves. And that connection phrase, and over time, is no longer intergenerational strength of communities that used to be. I'm just reminded of, once again, the Singapore model, where if a young couple is buying an apartment that is within walking distance from the grandparents, the government will give them subsidy. So the government is encouraging younger people to live within walking distance of the grandparents and so on. But that's like an artificial thing. And what Singapore does for 5 million people, it's very difficult to translate to many other countries. But traditionally, there was this, grandparents watched the children, and children grew up understanding what old age is about and the wisdom is about. Um, the example in Australia of Aborigines, the knowledge and the stories went from older people to younger people, and that is maybe now tenuous, and in United States as well, amongst the native communities. It always existed. In places like India, it's still strong, a lot of joint families, but in bigger cities, increasingly, um, single single people or smaller core families. So I think that's such a precious possibility and such a precious relationship that is being lost. And for older people to live in old people's areas, I mean, that's segregation again, right? So I think the healthy lifestyles are mixed income, mixed use, mixed generations. Those are really vibrant communities. But I think it's being stretched and becoming difficult in this me first sort of thinking that actually is advertised on television and made to look so glamorous. But in fact, it's not a good thing for social capital.
And I think especially when it comes to like environmental conservation, right? We've seen in some of our projects where there is so much of indigenous knowledge that can be transferred to the next generations. So really, like having that intergenerational connection really helps, transfer this knowledge across generations and still keep it like, still protect our like resources.
We have unfortunately here in North America, we have a booming industry of building homes to park our elderly in and not
Mm-hmm.
integrate them and keep them in the community. So that is, I would agree with you, severing part of our social capital. And, when I speak at length and write far too much about resilience. And when I think about that, when you look at the communities that are together on Sunday afternoon in the park, they are 70 or 80, and there is 3 or 4 generations together. And they're all together, and they're there, and they're present. And when you see that, that is a clear indicator, and the data is clear. Those are the communities that will do better and have better post-event outcomes in disasters. They just do. And it's not tied to economic level. It's not tied to access to financial resources. It's the power of their social capital and connections. And I just think that's something that we undervalue so much, and it is so, the cost is so low. And I think that's, and I don't want to take your time here, but the government consistently calling for billions of dollars in investment in infrastructure. And why not just invest in a couple of community centers and some programming to bring everybody together? And I think you'd get a lot more out of that than you would about massive infrastructure. That's a personal thing on mine. We have a few more minutes, if you don't mind sticking around, if there's any more questions. I don't
Jeff,
see
I
any more
want to.
in the chat. Go ahead, please.
No, I want to comment on what you are saying. It's so critical. I think the defense budget of the United States is something like $980 billion, almost like $1 trillion, right? And the entire annual budget of the United Nations is $3.5 billion. So the comparisons are ridiculous. The comparisons are shocking. The investment in unnecessary wars and infrastructure and arms, that's where the money is going, because there's not enough discussion in public forums like this about what the priorities should be and what the priorities can be. And I'm so happy to hear that in UK they are committing this much money to building social capital, but much more of that needs to happen. And Jeff, as you said very rightly, that would be like, if you think about the impact that a certain amount of money can have, that's where the money should be going. And I don't want to, get political, but so many people in the United States, so many groups are saying that the taxpayer money needs to go to services for our communities instead of bombing hospitals and schools in Gaza or another place. So I think it's how do we how do we make this conversation louder and say that social capital is the true wealth of communities. It is the um, true, true strength that communities can have in normal life as well as in the face of disasters. And that's where the money should be going. So I think what this organization does, International Social Capital Association, is so important in highlighting these voices. And each one of us who believes in this has a responsibility to speak as loudly as possible about that.
And we absolutely agree. And that's why we convened this first conference coming in Dubai, to get a chance to advocate for it again during the during the webinar in March of 2026. It's the first conference in over 20 years in the field of social capital. And we have 10 different streams. I'm chairing the disaster resilience stream, but there are 9 other streams looking at all different aspects of social capital across the capitals that you mentioned, across the 17 or 15 social development goals of the United Nations. And again, you're right. What we're trying to do is raise the conversation, because I'm a firm believer that the success is from the bottom up. You're never going to programmatically change the government unless there is a voice to change, and that comes from below.
Yeah.
And empowering the people below. I do have one more question in the chat, and then we'll call it a wrap. But Vishva, would you like me to ask that question on your behalf, or would you like to unmute yourself?
Jeff, there's
you can
also a
ask the
question from
question.
Mark.
Okay.
After
Yes, I'll
that,
get to.
maybe there's also a comment from Mark Chubb.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
I'll
go
get to
ahead.
that, but I'll ask the question. Many of the neighborhoods richest in social capital are also the most vulnerable to speculative investment. What could be the strategies that build social capital and upgrade housing without accelerating displacement? What tools or methods have you found most useful for capturing these temporal patterns of use and turning them into design or policy decisions, so that housing and public space can sustain social capital throughout the day rather than a single peak moment?
Yeah, this question relates exactly to our work in the Ravi. And around the world, you see that people who are in informal settlements rely or have a lot more social capital because they're in close proximity, they depend on each other, but also that becomes their strength. So as I mentioned, the redevelopment schemes that have existed there for some time, and every time people are able to resist those. And your question is, what are the methodologies to resist real estate pressure? It is people coming together, articulating their social capital, and what we did with the people were over several many meetings over several years to provide the vocabulary and help people articulate their own needs. And we always say that these are not informal developments, but communities in formation. These are not informal communities, but they are communities in formation, in the sense that if you simply give them the tenure to the land, and it can be periodic, it can be for X number of years, or something that people can feel sure that they will own and not be pushed away, then people begin to upgrade their homes. So I think tenure, giving tenure, legal tenure to people is the key. And then you see that, and we've seen that in Japan, right after war, as soon as people got tenure, they began to develop their communities, their streets, and the houses got better as people's income improved. And then those areas became vibrant communities and no longer looked like slums or so-called informal development. So the government needs to help with tenure and then water supply, sanitation. Because very often in informal communities, the governments don't provide these services, saying that if they provide, those people will never move out, right? But that's not that should not be the argument. Like in Medellin in Colombia, the government said no matter where you live, no matter if you own the land or not, you are entitled to electricity, water supply, and sewage, right? So the minute the government says that, and then the tenure is assured. It can be a lease, it can be an outright sale, it can be incremental ownership. So there are ways to deal with that, but I think that's the crux of the problem. And that is when you allow informal settlements to actually become communities, stronger communities. People already know each other, they have the social capital, they will build and they will improve. Everyone wants to improve their home. Sushmita, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, even like maybe decommodifying some of the land and housing can really help, like the community land trusts that we see, or even co-ops, or even nonprofit ownership, right? They can soak up some of the speculation and keep the housing affordable to people, and also like help improve these buildings and public spaces. And I think secondly, also maybe like we said, giving community that governance into projects, whether it is like giving formal roles for resident groups, like being on board or design review of projects, or really engaging them in like improving these spaces, can like really help build that social capital, and make them a part of the decision-making process. So they're like more glued to each other.
Yeah. And Neil, I'm also reminded here of a period in United States when President Kennedy was the president. A lot of money was pushed out to community boards, right? So every city has these divisions, and then the community boards were given money to upskill them, so many of them went out and hired architects who helped them visualize what their community could be, and then the community boards had this vision document on which they could then over time develop. So that was such a successful program. But then right after his death, and the Republicans actually just threw that program out of the window. But that was such a good model. So I think that there are many ways that communities can be strengthened. And definitely, as Sushmita mentioned, community ownership of land, and then community canvassing for services for their own land in terms of water supply, internet, sewage, and etc. And then people, informal settlements become communities. Yeah.
Thank you, Geeta. That's a really helpful example. I mean, we're struggling with what the support services around the formation of these neighbourhood boards that will really allocate some of that money, what that looks like, because when we've seen similar initiatives in the past, some have worked well, and they tend to be areas where there is already social capital and people have the time, I suppose, to invest in shared understandings. But in other places, they found it very hard to come to a decision on what the money should be spent on, because in their heads it's more, I don't want them to have it. And therefore we've seen initiatives where people have built infrastructure and it's been burnt down, to be fair, or communities come together and pick something that is very superficial because they've not found the strength of relationship to have the difficult discussions about really what the needs are. So yes, but we're hopeful, and we're, like you say, it's a positive thing that the government has thought that actually just economic growth, etc., isn't the starting point. Actually, social capital, building communities, building community infrastructure creates those things. But great example. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I think it's also just to add on what Neil said is when we talk about investment, often what I've seen here is the periodic and irregular investment, saying we're going to give a project money once. You generate the social capital, you generate the interest, you generate people realizing, hey, I might actually have a say in what the physical and cultural future of my community is. And then the tap is turned off because of an ideological switch in government, a priority switch in government, or some other, as you've alluded to before, Geeta, some other significant world event that draws the attention and the money away from social infrastructure, where we know that probably the smartest thing we can ever invest in is a community center and programming, like in any
Mm-hmm.
community whatsoever, and just not any specific type of programming, but programming that fuels the cultural development and the relationship building. This is something that I've seen on an unfortunate regular basis, is that you have that two
Mm-hmm.
years of funding and then the funding dies. And then the
Mm-hmm.
initiative falls off. And 6 months, 6 years later, when we go around the ideological cycle again, that funding is launched. And then we have this
Mm-hmm.
fits and starts, as my grandmother used to say all the time, of
Mm-hmm.
programmatic intervention. So it's hard. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to do. There is a comment from Mark in the chat that you wanted to highlight, Geeta.
Mark is on now turned on his camera. Mark, go ahead, please.
Yeah, you've touched on a number of themes, Geeta, that and Sushmita, that I find really, really important. One is the interdisciplinary nature of the enterprises we're talking about. No single discipline seems to own them. I've spent the 40 years of my career working across public, private, and non-governmental sectors. I've had stints in academia, stints in government, and I've had the good fortune of working around the world. And I was trained originally as an engineer and urban planner. And one of the things that's repeatedly impressed me as I've encountered some of the challenges that I've heard others voice here, the constant search for a return on investment, the problems of competition. I'd add another one, this incessant need to professionalize interventions rather than relying on community knowledge and co-production, is that, to your point about tenure, if we can't give people tenure and genuine ownership, we at least need to acknowledge their agency. And the initiatives
Mm-hmm.
I've been involved in, like the Bangladesh Factory Safety Initiative, started out as very hard engineering interventions. Let's fix factories. They're broken, they cause fires. And as soon as we started to invest in the factories, we knew that we had to invest in the workers alongside it, because we needed to get buy-in from these labor-intensive industries that were dominated by women in the workplace. And we knew that in particularly the Bangladesh context, that female empowerment was vital to community development and community engagement. And as soon as we created worker safety committees and hotlines, and they could see that physical investments in factories were supporting their efforts, we saw immediate improvements in retention, reductions in absenteeism, and reductions in business interruptions. Kind of the dirty little secret of the fire problem that we had in Bangladesh in the early 2000s was that many of those fires were actually intentionally set because of worker disturbances. They were attributed to other causes, but when we began to invest in worker safety holistically, not just with physical interventions, but with these soft interventions, all of those conditions improved, and we saw the frequency of fires drop, the interruptions drop, and the owners of those factories saw an almost immediate 10% improvement in net margin. So
Amazing.
there were
Amazing.
costs. Yes, they had to spend money. Yep. But they also saw that they got immediate margin returns on a very low margin business. And that reinforced their willingness to stay engaged. We also had to change the mindset of the people who were sponsoring our programs, who were like, we need to let the factory owners know that if they don't do these things, we're going to stop giving them contracts. And I went to the
Mm-hmm.
factory safety, the factory, the buyers that we were working with, and said, flip that over. Instead of telling them that you're going to suspend their contracts, tell them that if they complete this work within a certain time period, you'll guarantee the next order. And as soon as we flipped it over, we got compliance expedited. So I think the social aspect of this needs to be very well understood by practitioners of the hard arts and sciences, the hard practices, as you've noted with engineering and civil engineering and architecture. There are real opportunities to create environments that encourage the production of social capital. And the only way to do those projects on scale efficiently is to see the people who are beneficiaries as co-producers, not just clients.
Mark, this is so important and so interesting that you can authoritatively say that there was 10% improvement in output or something. Because I think calculating those sorts of numbers and being able to present those numbers really strengthens the case for social capital. And I think that's where a lot of work still needs to be done, in that we often maybe one way to do that is to calculate what the damage would be if social capital was not energized, and then work backwards and say that's one number, but then how do we avoid that and invest that money in actually making the factories safer? So I think that kind of calculation maybe is more convincing to so many in the world today who only listen to financial numbers. So I think that's a huge task in front of all of us. Jeff.
With that, I'll give one last shot if anybody has a parting comment that they want to make, or a question that is burning and needs to get asked before we head off for the rest of our day, or for some of us, whatever that may award. On behalf of ISCA, Tristan, the president, and the entire organization, I want to thank Geeta and Sushmita for being here today for this conversation and the wonderful webinar about this topic. I think we all can agree that building social capital is never time wasted, and it is something that can improve every community in every socioeconomic position. And I am amazed by your SOX program, and it is something that I will personally be investigating once we are done for here. So on behalf of everybody, I'd like to say thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording right now,